The velvet curtains of Eleanor Whitmore's bedroom had never felt like a prison until the day her father announced she would marry Thomas Hendricks, a portly banker twice her age with breath that reeked of tobacco and brandy. She stood at the window of their grand Victorian home in Wilcox, Arizona Territory, watching the dusty streets below where cowboys rode past her father's bank, free as the wind that swept across the desert. It was June 1885, and Eleanor was 20 years old, suffocating under the weight of expectations and silk dresses that cost more than most families earned in a year. Her father, Charles Whitmore, owned the largest bank between Tucson and the New Mexico border. His vault held more gold than most men would see in 10 lifetimes, and he intended to use his daughter as another kind of currency, trading her youth and beauty for business connections that would expand his empire even further. Eleanor had always been the dutiful daughter, attending finishing school back east, learning to play piano and speak French, knowing which fork to use at elaborate dinners. But something inside her had begun to crack like parched earth desperate for rain. The crack became a chasm the afternoon she met Quincy Keller at the general store. She had gone with her maid, a sweet older woman named Martha, who turned a blind eye when Eleanor lingered too long examining saddles and ranching equipment instead of the fabric and ribbons she was supposed to be selecting. Quincy was leaning against the counter, his worn leather chaps dusty from the trail, his dark hair curling slightly beneath a hat that had seen better days. He was negotiating with the shopkeeper over the price of rope, counting out coins from a small leather pouch with the careful attention of someone for whom every penny mattered. "That is my final offer," Quincy said, his voice low and steady. "I have been working for the Double R Ranch for 3 months now, and I know the fair price for supplies." The shopkeeper, a round man named Gilbert, shook his head. "The price is the price, cowboy. Take it or leave it." Eleanor surprised herself by speaking up. "The price seems rather inflated, Mr. Gilbert. I believe this gentleman is correct in his assessment." Both men turned to look at her, and when Quincy's eyes met hers, Eleanor felt something shift inside her chest. His eyes were the color of mesquite honey, warm and genuine, with tiny lines at the corners that suggested he smiled often despite whatever hardships life had thrown his way. "Begging your pardon, miss," Quincy said, removing his hat in a gesture of respect, "but I can fight my own battles. Though I do appreciate your concern. Miss Whitmore does not need to involve herself in such matters," Gilbert said quickly, recognizing the daughter of his wealthiest client. He immediately adjusted his tone. "Of course, if Miss Whitmore believes the price is too high, perhaps I was mistaken in my calculations." Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks, embarrassed by the way the shopkeeper's entire demeanor changed at the mention of her name. "I simply believe in fair dealings, Mr. Gilbert. That is all." Quincy studied her for a long moment, and Eleanor wondered what he saw. A spoiled rich girl playing at compassion, a china doll in an expensive dress who knew nothing of the real world. But when he smiled, it reached those honey-colored eyes, and she saw no judgment there, only curiosity. "Thank you, Miss Whitmore," he said, and the way he said her name made it sound less like a label and more like a melody. "Your sense of justice does you credit." She should have nodded politely and walked away. She should have collected her ribbons and returned to the carriage where her driver waited. Instead, she found herself saying, "Are you new to Wilcox, Mr. Keller? Quincy Keller?" He tucked his hat under his arm. "And yes, madam, relatively new, been here about 4 months now. Came up from Texas looking for honest work. And have you found it?" "I have. The Double R is a good outfit. Mr. Rawlings treats his men fair, pays on time, does not work us beyond reason." He paused, and something playful flickered across his features. "Though I suspect my accommodations are somewhat less grand than yours." Eleanor laughed before she could stop herself, a genuine sound that felt foreign after so many practiced, polite titters at her father's dinner parties. "I suspect you are correct in that assessment, Mr. Keller." Martha cleared her throat behind her, a gentle reminder that they had already stayed longer than was proper. Eleanor reluctantly gathered her packages, but as she turned to leave, Quincy spoke again. "Miss Whitmore, I hope you will forgive my boldness, but I am wondering if you ever ride out beyond the town limits. The desert has a way of putting things in perspective, and something tells me you might appreciate that." It was completely inappropriate. They had not been properly introduced. He was a penniless cowboy, and she was the daughter of the wealthiest man in the territory. Every rule of society said she should ignore the question, or, better yet, report his impudence to her father. "I do not," she said carefully, aware of Martha's sharp intake of breath behind her. "But perhaps I should start." The smile Quincy gave her then was like sunrise breaking over the Chiricahua Mountains, full of promise and warmth. "Perhaps you should, Miss Whitmore, perhaps you should." That night Eleanor could not sleep. She paced her room, her nightgown swirling around her ankles as she moved from window to wardrobe and back again. Her room was filled with beautiful things. A four-poster bed with an embroidered canopy, a mahogany wardrobe imported from Boston, a dressing table covered with crystal bottles of perfume and silver-backed brushes. But none of it meant anything. She thought of Quincy Keller counting out his coins, the careful way he handled his meager resources, the pride in his posture despite his worn clothes. He had something she did not have: freedom. The next morning, her father called her into his study. Charles Whitmore was a large man who had grown larger with success, his belly straining against gold waistcoat buttons, his jowls drooping over his starched collar. He sat behind a massive desk, surrounded by ledgers and documents, the tools of his trade. "Eleanor, I have spoken with Thomas Hendricks. He is most eager to formalize our arrangement. We will announce the engagement at the territorial governor's ball next month." "Father, I do not love Thomas Hendricks." Charles looked up from his papers, his expression suggesting she had said something in a foreign language. "Love? What does love have to do with anything? This is about security, about legacy, about maintaining our position in society. What about my happiness?" "Your happiness will come from knowing you have done your duty to your family. Thomas is a respected man. He will provide well for you." "I can provide well for myself with the education you gave me." Her father's face darkened. "Enough of this foolishness. The decision is made. You will marry Thomas Hendricks, and that is final." He returned his attention to his ledgers, dismissing her as he might a clerk who had overstepped. Eleanor left the study with her heart pounding. She had 3 weeks until the ball, 3 weeks until her fate was sealed. She spent the rest of the day in a daze, mechanically going through the motions of her daily routine. Breakfast on the terrace, piano practice, needlework in the parlor. But her mind was miles away, riding across the open desert with honey-colored eyes and a genuine smile. She began riding out the next day, telling her parents she needed exercise and fresh air. Her father barely looked up from his newspaper, and her mother, a frail woman who spent most of her time in bed with mysterious ailments, simply waved her hand in vague approval. Eleanor took her mare, a beautiful chestnut named Marigold, and rode toward the Double R Ranch with her heart in her throat. She found Quincy mending fence in the hot afternoon sun. He looked up as she approached, surprise and pleasure mingling on his sun-bronzed face. He set down his tools and walked over, shielding his eyes from the glare. "Miss Whitmore, I confess I did not expect to see you out here. I took your advice about the desert providing perspective." She dismounted, grateful for the practical riding habit she had chosen instead of her usual elaborate side saddle arrangement. "Am I intruding on your work?" "Nothing that cannot wait." He glanced back at the fence, then at her. "Would you like to see something remarkable?" They walked together, leading Marigold, until they reached an outcropping of rocks that overlooked a vast expanse of desert. The landscape stretched out in shades of gold and amber, dotted with sagebrush and mesquite, the mountains rising in the distance like ancient sentinels. The wind carried the scent of dust and creosote, wild and clean. "This is what I think about when people like your father look at me and see nothing but a saddle tramp," Quincy said quietly. "Out here, none of that matters. A man is measured by his character, not his bank account." Eleanor turned to look at him. "You know who my father is. Everyone knows who your father is, just like everyone knows his daughter is supposed to marry Thomas Hendricks next month." He met her eyes steadily. "I also know that you do not look like a woman in love when you walk through town." "I am not in love with him. I barely know him. But my father has decided this is what is best for the family business." "And what do you think is best for Eleanor?" No one had asked her that before. Not her parents, not her teachers, not the society matrons who tutored her in etiquette. The question hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility. "I think Eleanor wants to make her own choices," she said finally. "I think Eleanor wants to live a life that matters, not just look decorative in someone else's life." Quincy nodded slowly. "That is a dangerous thing to want, Miss Whitmore. Dangerous and brave." They talked until the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Eleanor learned that Quincy was 24 years old, that he had grown up on a small ranch in Texas, until drought drove his family north, that his father had died trying to save their herd during a flash flood, that his mother had remarried, and Quincy had set out on his own to make his way in the world. He had worked as a ranch hand, a trail driver, even a deputy for a short time in New Mexico territory. But he had always dreamed of having his own piece of land, modest though it might be. "Just enough for some cattle, maybe some horses," he said, his voice taking on a dreamy quality. "A house that keeps out the rain, a porch where you can watch the sunset. Nothing fancy, but it would be mine, built with my own hands and honest work." "That sounds wonderful," Eleanor said, and she meant it. It sounded more wonderful than all the crystal chandeliers and Persian rugs in her father's mansion. As she rode home that evening, Eleanor realized she was falling in love with Quincy Keller. It was reckless and foolish and completely impossible, but it was also the most real thing she had ever felt. Over the next 2 weeks, they met whenever they could. Eleanor would ride out with increasingly flimsy excuses, and Quincy would arrange his work to coincide with her visits. They talked about everything. Books, though Quincy had read few, he listened with rapt attention as Eleanor described her favorites. She told him about the suffragist writings she had discovered hidden in the library, about Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, about the idea that women deserved the same rights and opportunities as men. He told her about the land, about reading weather and tracking animals, about the satisfaction of hard physical work, and sleeping under stars so thick they looked like spilled sugar. They were sitting by a small creek, watching water bugs skate across the surface, when Quincy took her hand for the first time. His palm was calloused and warm, completely different from Thomas Hendricks' soft, damp grip. "Eleanor," he said, using her first name for the first time, "I know I have no right to say this. I know I cannot offer you anything close to what you are accustomed to. But I am falling in love with you, and I needed you to know that before you marry Thomas Hendricks." Her heart felt like it might burst from her chest. "Quincy, I do not want what I am accustomed to. I want a life that means something. I want to be with someone who sees me as a person, not a possession." "Then do not marry him." "It is not that simple. My father would never allow me to refuse. He would lock me in my room if necessary." "Then leave with me." The words hung between them, radical and terrifying and thrilling all at once. "Leave," Eleanor whispered. "Tonight, tomorrow, whenever you are ready. We could go north to Montana or west to California. I have some money saved, not much, but enough to get us started. I can find work anywhere. I can provide for you, Eleanor. Maybe not with mansions and servants, but I swear to you, you would never want for anything that truly matters." Eleanor thought of her bedroom with its velvet curtains, her wardrobe full of expensive dresses, the future that had been planned for her since birth. Then she thought of Quincy's dream, a modest house, a porch for watching sunsets, a life built on love and honest work. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will leave with you." They made their plans carefully. Eleanor would pack only what she could carry in saddlebags, things she could sell if necessary, along with some practical clothes. Quincy would draw his wages from the ranch and buy supplies for the journey. They would leave in 3 days, in the middle of the night when the house was quiet. They would ride north toward New Mexico territory first, then cut west toward California, where land was still available for homesteading, and a man could make a fresh start. The night before they were to leave, Eleanor attended what would be her last dinner in her father's house. Thomas Hendricks was there, droning on about interest rates and property acquisitions while her father nodded approvingly. Her mother picked at her food, barely present. Eleanor studied them all, these people who were supposed to be her family, and realized she felt nothing but pity for them. They were so focused on accumulating wealth that they had forgotten how to live. "Eleanor, you are unusually quiet tonight," Thomas said, his small eyes fixing on her. "Is something troubling you?" "Not at all, Mr. Hendricks. I am simply contemplating the future." "A future as my wife, I hope," he said, attempting what she supposed was meant to be a charming smile. "Your father and I have great plans. With the Whitmore and Hendricks banks combined, we will control the entire southern Arizona territory economy." "How fortunate for you both," Eleanor said evenly. That night, she packed her saddlebags by candlelight. 2 practical dresses, undergarments, her mother's pearl necklace that she planned to sell, a few books she could not bear to part with, and a small daguerreotype of herself as a child. She changed into her riding habit and sat by the window, waiting for the house to fall silent. At midnight, she crept down the servants' stairs, her boots in her hand, her heart hammering so hard she was certain someone would hear it. She made it to the stable without incident and saddled Marigold with shaking hands. The mare seemed to sense the importance of silence, standing still as Eleanor secured the saddlebags and mounted. Quincy was waiting at the edge of town, just a shadow against the starlit desert. When he saw her, his whole face transformed with relief and joy. "I was afraid you might change your mind," he said quietly, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "Never," Eleanor replied. "Let us go before I lose my courage." They rode through the night, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and Wilcox. Eleanor knew that by morning her absence would be discovered. Her father would be furious, Thomas Hendricks humiliated. There would be a scandal that would ripple through Arizona Territory society. But as the miles stretched between her and that life, she felt lighter than she had in years. Dawn found them resting the horses near a small spring. Quincy built a careful fire and made coffee in a battered pot. Eleanor had never tasted anything so good in her life. "How are you managing?" Quincy asked, studying her face in the growing light. "I am tired and sore, and I have never been happier," Eleanor said honestly. "Is that strange?" "Not even a little bit." He moved closer to her, and when he kissed her for the first time, it was gentle and sweet and full of promise. "We should get married as soon as possible. I want to do this properly, Eleanor. I want you to be my wife in truth, not just my traveling companion." "I would like that very much." They reached Silver City, New Mexico Territory, 2 days later. It was a rough mining town, loud and dusty and completely unlike anywhere Eleanor had ever been. But it had a courthouse and a judge, and that was all they needed. Judge Morrison was a weathered man with kind eyes who asked no questions about why a young woman in expensive riding clothes and a dusty cowboy wanted to be married at dawn. "You enter into this marriage of your own free will?" he asked Eleanor. "I do," she said, looking at Quincy with absolute certainty. "Then, by the power vested in me by the territory of New Mexico, I pronounce you husband and wife." Quincy kissed her again, this time with more passion, and Eleanor felt tears streaming down her face. She was married to a man with nothing but the clothes on his back and a horse to his name, and she had never felt richer. They spent their wedding night in a modest hotel room that cost 75 cents. Quincy was gentle and patient, and Eleanor discovered that physical intimacy could be something beautiful when it was based on love and mutual respect. Afterward, they lay tangled together, talking about their plans for the future. "We will keep moving west," Quincy said, running his fingers through her hair, which she had finally let down from its elaborate pins. "I have heard there is good land in Central California near the San Joaquin Valley. We could file a homestead claim, start building a life. Will we have enough money to get there, if we are careful? I can pick up work along the way. You could sell that pearl necklace if necessary." "It was my mother's," Eleanor said, "but she never wore it. She was always too sick, or so she claimed. I think she was just sick of her life." "I will sell it gladly if it means building something real with you." They continued west, taking odd jobs in the towns they passed through. Quincy did ranch work, repaired fences, broke horses. Eleanor discovered she had a talent for cooking and took work in a restaurant in Lordsburg, rising before dawn to bake bread and prepare meals for miners and cowboys. Her hands, which had never done anything more strenuous than needlework, became rough and capable. Her expensive dresses were replaced with simple calico and homespun. She had never been more exhausted or more alive. In Tucson, they sold Eleanor's pearl necklace to a jeweler for $200. It was a fortune to them, enough to buy supplies and pay for passage on a stage heading west. The jeweler looked at Eleanor curiously. "This is a fine piece, madam. Family heirloom." "It was," Eleanor said. "Now it is seed money for a better future." News of their elopement had spread as they knew it would. In a hotel in Yuma, they saw a newspaper from Wilcox. The headline read, "Banker's daughter absconds with cowboy, father offers reward." Charles Whitmore was offering $500 for information leading to Eleanor's return. Quincy looked worried. "That is a lot of money. Someone might recognize you." "Then we keep moving," Eleanor said firmly. "I am not going back, Quincy. I would rather live in a tent in the desert with you than in a mansion without you." They crossed into California in August 1885, 2 months after they had fled Wilcox. The landscape changed from desert to agricultural valleys, and Eleanor saw possibilities everywhere. They traveled north, through small towns and farming communities, until they reached the San Joaquin Valley. The land office in Fresno had maps and information about available homestead claims. The clerk, a young man with ink-stained fingers, spread a map across the counter. "There is good land available about 30 miles east of here," he said, pointing to a section near the foothills. "Water rights, decent soil, but it is rough country. You would be building from scratch." Quincy and Eleanor looked at each other. "We will take it," they said together. The homestead claim gave them 160 acres and required them to build a dwelling and cultivate the land for 5 years. It was daunting and perfect. They used the remaining money from the pearl necklace to buy tools, seeds, lumber, and 2 mules. Quincy built a temporary shelter out of canvas and scrap wood while they worked on a proper house. The work was backbreaking. They cleared brush, dug irrigation ditches, built fences. Eleanor learned to handle an axe and a plow. Her hands blistered and bled, then calloused over. Her skin bronzed in the sun. She lost weight and gained muscle. Every morning she woke sore and exhausted, but when she looked at what they were building together, she felt a pride she had never experienced in her father's mansion. Quincy proved to be an excellent carpenter. The house he built was small, just 2 rooms initially, but it was solid and well made. They chinked the gaps with mud and grass, installed a wood-burning stove Quincy bought secondhand, built furniture from rough-cut lumber. Eleanor sewed curtains from feed sacks and planted a garden near the house. Their neighbors, a family named Peterson who had homesteaded nearby 3 years earlier, came to introduce themselves. Frank Peterson was a sturdy Swede who had immigrated with his wife Ingrid and their 4 children. They brought bread and milk and offered advice about surviving in this new land. "The first year is the hardest," Frank said, walking around the property with Quincy while Eleanor and Ingrid talked. "But the soil is good here if you work it right. What are you planning to grow?" "I am thinking wheat initially," Quincy said. "Maybe some alfalfa for hay. Eventually, I would like to run some cattle, but that will take capital." "Smart thinking. There is a good market for grain in Fresno. You have a strong back and you are not afraid of work. You will do well." Ingrid pulled Eleanor aside while their husbands talked. "You are not from farming people, are you?" Eleanor hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "No, I grew up in town. This is all very new to me." "I thought so. Your hands are getting tough, though. That is good." Ingrid smiled warmly. "It is hard work, this life, but it is honest. My Frank and I started with nothing but hope and determination. Now we have a good house, healthy children, land that belongs to us. You will have the same if you keep at it." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you. Sometimes I wonder if we made the right choice, giving up everything for this." "Did you give up everything, though? Or did you trade things that did not matter for things that do?" It was a question Eleanor thought about often as the months passed. Her first winter on the homestead was harsh. The small house kept out most of the wind and rain, but there were nights when the cold seeped through every crack. They huddled together for warmth, burning precious wood in the stove, making meals from their dwindling supplies. Eleanor learned to make soup from almost nothing, to stretch flour and beans, to be grateful for eggs from the chickens they had acquired. But there were also moments of such perfect happiness that Eleanor felt her heart might burst. Quincy would come in from working the fields, his face dirty and tired, and he would smile at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. They would sit by the fire after supper, and he would read aloud from one of her books, stumbling over the harder words but persisting because he knew she loved literature. She would help him with his letters, teaching him to read more fluently, and he would teach her about the land, about reading the sky for weather and the soil for what it needed. Spring brought new life to the homestead. Eleanor discovered she was pregnant in March. She told Quincy one evening as they sat on the porch he had built, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. "I am going to have a baby," she said quietly. Quincy turned to her, his expression moving through surprise to wonder to pure joy in the space of a heartbeat. "A baby." "Eleanor, are you certain?" "As certain as I can be. I have missed my courses for 2 months now, and I have been feeling sick in the mornings." He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "We are going to be parents. We are going to have a family." His voice was thick with emotion. "I promise you, Eleanor, I will work every day of my life to give this child and you everything you need." "You already have," she said, touching his face. "You have given us love and freedom and a life that means something. That is more than enough." The pregnancy was difficult. Eleanor was sick for the first few months, and Ingrid Peterson became her closest friend, riding over regularly to check on her and share advice from her own 4 pregnancies. As Eleanor's belly grew, she had to adjust how she worked, but she refused to stop helping Quincy. She tended the garden, fed the chickens and pigs they had acquired, cooked and cleaned and mended clothes. Quincy was terrified something would happen to her. He hovered constantly, trying to take over all the heavy work, arguing with her when she insisted on helping. "You need to rest," he said one hot June day when he found her hoeing the garden. "The baby needs you to rest. The baby needs to eat, which means we need this garden to produce." "I am pregnant, Quincy, not an invalid. Women have been doing this since the beginning of time. But you are my woman, and this is my child, and I cannot lose you." Eleanor set down her hoe and went to him, taking his hands in hers. "You are not going to lose me. I am stronger than I look. I am stronger than I ever knew I could be. This life has made me strong." Their first child, a son, was born in October 1886. The birth was long and painful, attended by Ingrid and a midwife from the nearest town. Quincy paced outside, wearing a path in the dirt, until he heard the baby's first cry. He rushed in to find Eleanor exhausted but smiling, holding a red-faced, squalling infant. "We have a son," she said. "Quincy, we have a son." They named him William Charles Keller, William for Quincy's father, Charles because despite everything, Eleanor wanted her child to carry a piece of her own father, even if they might never meet. Quincy held his son with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect. You are perfect." "I do not deserve this, Eleanor. I do not deserve you or him." "Yes, you do," Eleanor said firmly. "We both deserve this. We earned this." The years that followed were full of hard work and simple joys. The homestead prospered. Quincy proved to be an excellent farmer, learning from Frank Peterson and other neighbors, experimenting with different crops and techniques. They grew wheat and barley, planted an orchard of fruit trees, raised chickens and pigs, and eventually a small herd of cattle. Eleanor's garden produced vegetables that she preserved for winter, and she began selling eggs and butter in Fresno, adding to their income. William grew into a sturdy, curious child who followed his father everywhere, learning about the land and animals. Eleanor found she loved being a mother, though it was nothing like she had imagined during her sheltered upbringing. There were no nannies or nursemaids here. She was the one who woke in the night when William cried, who cleaned scraped knees and told bedtime stories, who taught him his letters and numbers. In 1888, Eleanor gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Rose Margaret. She had Eleanor's dark hair and Quincy's honey-colored eyes, and she was utterly adored by her big brother. The house, which Quincy had expanded to 4 rooms, rang with the sounds of children's laughter. One evening, as Eleanor nursed Rose while Quincy and William sat at the table working on reading lessons, she looked around their modest home and realized something profound. She was richer than her father had ever been. Not in gold or banknotes, but in the things that truly mattered: love, family, purpose, freedom. "What are you smiling about?" Quincy asked, looking up from the book. "I am just thinking about how far we have come. How different this is from what I thought my life would be. Do you have regrets?" Not a single one. The question of her father and her past life in Wilcox hung between them sometimes, unspoken but present. Eleanor occasionally wondered what had become of Charles Whitmore, whether he had ever forgiven her betrayal, whether he ever thought of the daughter he had lost. But she never seriously considered reaching out. That part of her life was over, as final as a closed book. Then, in the spring of 1890, the past found them anyway. Eleanor was in Fresno selling eggs and butter at the market when she saw a familiar face across the crowded square. Martha, her old maid from Wilcox, older and grayer but unmistakably the same woman who had turned a blind eye to Eleanor's riding excursions all those years ago. Their eyes met, and Martha's face registered shock, then something like joy. Eleanor's first instinct was to run, but something made her stay. Martha hurried over, tears streaming down her weathered face. "Miss Eleanor, is it really you?" "It is Mrs. Keller now," Eleanor said quietly. "Hello, Martha." "Oh, my dear girl, your father thought." There were such terrible rumors. Some said the cowboy had murdered you and taken your jewelry. Some said you had died of fever on the trail. Your father hired investigators, but they found nothing. Eleanor felt a pang of guilt. However justified her departure, she had not considered how her disappearance might have affected the servants who had cared for her, people like Martha who had been kind. "I am well, as you can see. I am married. I have 2 children. We have a homestead east of here." Martha looked her over, taking in the simple dress, the work-roughened hands, the sun-bronzed skin. "You look happy. Are you happy?" "Happier than I ever was in Wilcox." Martha nodded slowly. "Your father is not well, Miss Eleanor. Mrs. Keller, I mean. He had a stroke last year. He is confined to a wheelchair now, and the business is being managed by Thomas Hendricks, who married a woman from Tucson. Your mother still asks for you sometimes, in her lucid moments." Eleanor felt a complicated tangle of emotions. Pity, residual anger, sadness for the relationship they had never had. "I am sorry to hear he is unwell, but I cannot go back, Martha. That life is over for me. I understand. I just thought you should know." Martha reached out and squeezed Eleanor's hand. "For what it is worth, I am glad you escaped. I watched you wilt in that house like a flower kept in the dark. You were meant for sunshine and fresh air." They talked for a few more minutes before parting ways. Eleanor rode home in a thoughtful mood, and that evening she told Quincy about the encounter. "You want to see him?" Quincy asked carefully. "Your father, I mean. If he is ill, this might be your last chance." Eleanor considered it. Part of her, the small part that was still Charles Whitmore's daughter, felt she should go, should try to make peace before it was too late. But the larger part, the part that was Quincy Keller's wife and William and Rose's mother, knew that reopening that door would serve no purpose. "No," she said finally. "He made his choices and I made mine. I wish him no ill, but I have nothing to say to him. My life is here now with you and our children." Quincy pulled her close. "I love you, Eleanor Keller. I love your strength and your conviction. I love that you chose this life, chose me, even though it meant giving up everything." "I did not give up everything," Eleanor said, echoing Ingrid's words from years ago. "I traded things that did not matter for things that do. That is not sacrifice. That is wisdom." The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of farming life, planting and harvest, birth and growth, hardship and triumph. The homestead continued to prosper. Quincy's careful management and Eleanor's business acumen made them respected members of the farming community. They expanded their acreage by purchasing adjacent land from a family moving back east. The herd of cattle grew. The orchards matured and produced abundant fruit. William grew into a young man who loved the land as much as his father did, already talking about his own homestead someday. Rose was bright and curious, constantly asking questions about everything from why the sky was blue to how banks worked. Eleanor taught both children to read and write. using her own extensive education to give them opportunities she knew were rare for children of farmers. In 1895, a decade after they had fled Wilcox, Eleanor and Quincy took their children to the California coast for the first time. They camped on the beach, and the children played in the waves while Quincy and Eleanor walked along the sand, holding hands like young lovers. "Do you remember what you told me that day by the creek?" Eleanor asked. "About your dream of a house that keeps out the rain and a porch for watching sunsets." "I remember everything about those days. They are burned into my memory like brands. You got your dream, you know. We built it together." Quincy stopped walking and turned to face her. The ocean wind whipped his hair, now shot through with silver at the temples. He was 34 years old, and life had weathered him in the way it does men who work hard under the sun. But his eyes were still the same honey color that had captivated her in the general store all those years ago. "I got more than my dream, Eleanor. I got you. Everything else is just details." They kissed while their children shrieked with laughter in the waves, and Eleanor thought about the life she might have had if she had married Thomas Hendricks. She would have lived in a fine house, worn expensive dresses, attended balls and social functions. She would have been respectable and proper and utterly miserable. Instead, she lived in a modest farmhouse, wore simple clothes she had often sewn herself, had calluses on her hands and sun on her face, and she was profoundly, deeply happy. In 1897, a letter arrived from Wilcox. Eleanor recognized her mother's handwriting on the envelope, though it was shakier than she remembered. Inside was a brief note. "Eleanor, your father passed away last month. He died quietly in his sleep. Before he died, he asked me to tell you that he was sorry, that he understood why you left, and that he hoped you found what you were looking for. The bank has been sold. I am moving to live with my sister in Philadelphia. If you wish to contact me, Martha knows how to reach me. Your loving mother." Eleanor read the letter twice, then handed it to Quincy. She felt tears on her cheeks, but she was not sure what she was crying for. The father she had known, or the father she might have had if he had been a different man. "Are you all right?" Quincy asked gently. "I think so. It is strange. I spent so many years angry at him for trying to control my life. But he was just doing what he thought was right, what he had been taught to believe was important. He could not see that there were other ways to measure success." "Will you write to your mother?" Eleanor thought about it. Her mother had been a passive presence in her childhood, neither cruel nor particularly loving, just absent in all the ways that mattered. But she was still her mother, and they had both escaped Charles Whitmore's control in their own ways. "Yes," she said finally, "I will write to her. I will tell her about you and the children, about the life we have built. I will tell her that I forgive him and that I hope she finds some peace now that she is free." She did write, and to her surprise, her mother wrote back. They exchanged letters several times a year after that, a tentative rebuilding of a connection that had been severed. Eleanor's mother never visited California. Her health would not allow it, but she sent small gifts for her grandchildren. Books for Rose, a good knife for William, sketches of the house in Wilcox where Eleanor had grown up. "She seems different in her letters," Eleanor told Quincy after one such exchange. "Lighter somehow, as if being away from my father allowed her to breathe for the first time." "Some people drain the life from those around them," Quincy observed. "Not from malice necessarily, but from the weight of their own expectations and disappointments. Your father was that kind of man." "And what kind of man are you?" Quincy smiled. "I am the kind of man who married the bravest woman I have ever met and spends every day trying to be worthy of her." "You are worthy of me, Quincy Keller. You always have been." The new century arrived with celebrations in Fresno and throughout California. Eleanor and Quincy stood on their porch with their children, now 14 and 12 years old, watching fireworks in the distant sky, welcoming the year 1900. A new century, Eleanor mused. William will be a man soon. Rose is already asking about going to university, though I am not sure we can afford it. We will find a way if that is what she wants, Quincy said firmly. I never had much education, but I have seen what it did for you. If Rose wants to learn, we will make it happen. My father would have approved of that sentiment at least, Eleanor said with a wry smile. He believed in education, even if he had narrow ideas about what to do with it. Their financial situation had improved considerably over the years. The homestead was fully paid off, a thriving operation that produced steady income. Quincy had invested wisely in additional land and livestock. Eleanor had started a small business selling preserved fruits and vegetables, which had grown to supply several stores in Fresno. They were not wealthy by Charles Whitmore's standards, but they were comfortable, and every penny they had was earned through their own labor. In 1902, William announced his intention to marry a neighbor's daughter, a sweet girl named Sarah who had grown up on a nearby farm. Quincy helped his son file a homestead claim on land adjacent to their own property, and together they built a house for the young couple. Eleanor watched her son marry his sweetheart and felt the circle of life continuing. Rose, true to her word, went to the California State Normal School in San Jose to become a teacher. It took careful saving and some sacrifice, but Eleanor and Quincy were determined to give their daughter the opportunity to pursue her dreams. When Rose left for school in the fall of 1903, Eleanor cried for a week, missing her daughter's bright presence in the house. "Our nest is emptying," she said to Quincy one evening as they sat on their porch, a ritual they had maintained for nearly 20 years now. "It is supposed to," Quincy said, taking her hand. "We raised them to be strong and independent, to make their own choices. They are doing exactly what we taught them to do. I know, but I miss them already. Then we will fill our time with other things. I have been thinking about expanding the orchard, maybe trying some of those new citrus varieties. And you have been talking about writing a book about farming and homesteading for women. You could finally do that." Eleanor looked at him in surprise. "You remember me mentioning that?" "That was years ago." "I remember everything you say, Eleanor. Always have." She did write the book, working on it over the next 2 years during the quiet evenings when the farm work was done. It was a practical guide for women coming to California to homestead, full of advice about gardening, preserving food, managing household budgets, and balancing farm work with family life. She wrote about her own experiences, though she changed enough details to protect her privacy, and she included contributions from Ingrid Peterson and other women farmers she had come to know. Finding a publisher was difficult. Many rejected it outright, saying there was no market for such a book. But finally, a small press in San Francisco agreed to publish it. The Homesteader's Wife, a practical guide for women building a life in the West, came out in 1906, and to everyone's surprise, including Eleanor's, became quite popular. Women wrote to her from all over California and beyond, thanking her for the practical advice and the encouragement to pursue their own dreams. "You are an author now," Quincy said proudly, holding a copy of her book. "Eleanor Keller, published writer." "Eleanor Whitmore Keller," Eleanor corrected with a smile. "I am finally using both names, the one I was born with and the one I chose. They are both part of who I am." The book brought in modest royalties that Eleanor saved for their future. Rose graduated from the normal school and took a teaching position in a small town north of Fresno. William and Sarah had their first child, making Eleanor and Quincy grandparents. Life continued its steady, satisfying rhythm. In 1910, 25 years after they had fled Wilcox, Eleanor and Quincy decided to take a trip. Rose was teaching, William was managing his own successful farm, and they felt they could leave the homestead in his capable hands for a few weeks. They traveled by train, a luxury they could finally afford, going north through Oregon and Washington. They visited cities and forests, saw the Pacific Ocean from different vantage points, and stayed in hotels that ranged from modest to surprisingly comfortable. It was the honeymoon they had never had, and they savored every moment. One evening in a hotel in Portland, they dressed up for dinner in the formal dining room. Eleanor wore a new dress she had bought specifically for the trip, dark blue silk with simple but elegant lines. Quincy wore a suit that made him look distinguished rather than rough, his silver-streaked hair neatly combed. "You are still the most beautiful woman I have ever seen," Quincy said as they danced to a small orchestra. "You are a terrible liar, Quincy Keller." "I am 45 years old with gray in my hair and wrinkles around my eyes. And every gray hair and every wrinkle tells a story of a life well lived. You are beautiful because you are real, because you chose a hard path and walked it with grace and strength. You are beautiful because you are you." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "I love you so much, more now than I did when we ran away together and I did not think that was possible." "Love grows when you tend it properly," Quincy said, "like anything worth having." They returned home to find the farm running smoothly under William's management. Their grandson, now a sturdy 3-year-old, ran to greet them, and Eleanor scooped him up, breathing in the sweet smell of childhood. The years that followed brought more grandchildren, both from William and Sarah, and eventually from Rose, who married a fellow teacher and settled in Sacramento. Eleanor and Quincy's hair turned fully silver, and their bodies bore the marks of decades of hard physical labor, but their spirits remained young. In 1915, 30 years after they had eloped, they stood on their porch watching the sunset as they had done thousands of times before. The farm sprawled around them, more than 300 acres now, a thriving operation that employed several workers and produced diverse crops. The house had been expanded again to accommodate visiting children and grandchildren, with proper plumbing and even electricity from a generator Quincy had installed. "You ever think about what your father would say if he could see all this?" Quincy asked. Eleanor considered the question. "I think he would be surprised. He thought I was throwing away my future when I left with you. He could not imagine that a penniless cowboy could provide for his daughter. And did I provide for you? You gave me everything I needed. Not everything I was accustomed to, but everything that mattered." She gestured at the farm, the orchards heavy with fruit, the fields of wheat golden in the setting sun. "We built an empire here, Quincy. Maybe not the kind my father would recognize, but a real one nonetheless. Built on love and honest work and mutual respect. Built by two people who were brave enough to choose their own path." "Built by you," Eleanor corrected. "I just came along for the ride." "No," Quincy said firmly, turning to face her. "Built by us together. Every fence post, every furrow, every fruit tree, every decision. We did this together, Eleanor. That is what made it possible." She knew he was right. Her father's wealth had been built on the labor of others, on interest and investments and financial manipulations she had never fully understood. But their wealth, modest by comparison but infinitely more valuable, had been built by their own hands. Every acre of their land had been cleared and planted by them. Every building had been constructed with Quincy's skill and Eleanor's help. Every success was earned, every setback overcome through their combined effort. "We are richer than my father's vault," Eleanor said softly. "Not in gold, but in the things that cannot be locked away or stolen or diminished by economic downturns. We are rich in love, in family, in purpose, in the satisfaction of work well done. And in each other, Quincy added, pulling her close. Never forget that we are rich in each other. They stood together as the sun completed its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, colors so vivid they seemed unreal. But it was all real. The land, the life, the love. More real than anything Eleanor had known in her father's mansion. As the years continued, Eleanor and Quincy gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the farm, letting William take over more responsibility. They became the wise elders of the family, the grandparents who told stories of the old days and dispensed hard-won wisdom. Eleanor continued to write, publishing 2 more books about homesteading and rural life. Quincy mentored young farmers in the area, sharing techniques he had perfected over decades. In 1920, they celebrated their 35th wedding anniversary with a party attended by family and friends from all over California. Rose traveled from Sacramento with her husband and 3 children. William and Sarah, now running one of the most successful farms in the region, hosted the celebration. Grandchildren of various ages ran around the property while adults shared food and stories. Frank and Ingrid Peterson were there, now elderly themselves, their own children spread across the state. "I told you that first year," Ingrid said to Eleanor, "that you would make it if you kept at it. I never imagined you would do quite this well, though." "We had good teachers," Eleanor replied, squeezing Ingrid's weathered hand. "And we were desperate enough to succeed that failure was not an option." "It was never desperation," Quincy corrected, overhearing. "It was determination. There is a difference." As the party wound down and the sun began to set, Quincy stood up and clinked his glass for attention. The crowd quieted, turning to look at the silver-haired man who still stood straight and strong despite his 60 years. "I am not much for speeches," Quincy began, "but I want to say something tonight. 35 years ago, I met a woman in a general store in Wilcox, Arizona Territory. She was the daughter of the richest man in town, and I was a cowboy with holes in my boots and barely enough money for rope. By all rights, we should never have spoken beyond a polite greeting. But she saw something in me, or maybe I saw something in her, and we took a chance on each other that changed both our lives." He turned to look at Eleanor, and the love in his eyes was as fresh and genuine as it had been that day by the creek when he first told her he was falling for her. "Eleanor, you gave up a life of ease and luxury to build something real with me. You worked alongside me in the fields, bore our children in a 2-room house with no doctor nearby, went without so we could invest in our future. You never complained, never asked to go back, never made me feel like I was not enough. You took a penniless cowboy and made him feel like the richest man alive." Eleanor was crying openly now, as were many of the women in the crowd and more than a few of the men. "I cannot give you mansions or diamonds or trips to Europe," Quincy continued, "but I can promise you that every day for the rest of my life, I will wake up grateful that you chose me. I will work to be worthy of the choice you made and the life we built. And I will love you with everything I have until my last breath." He raised his glass. "To Eleanor, my wife, my partner, my best friend, the bravest woman I have ever known." "To Eleanor," the crowd echoed, raising their glasses. Eleanor stood and went to Quincy, kissing him soundly while their children and grandchildren cheered. "You are everything I needed," she whispered against his lips. "Everything I will ever need." They lived another decade together, watching their family grow and prosper. More grandchildren arrived, and even great-grandchildren. The farm continued to thrive under William's management, adapted to new agricultural techniques while maintaining the core principles Quincy had established. Eleanor's books remained popular, reprinted several times, and she received letters from women all over the country who had been inspired by her story. Though most did not know the author was the same Eleanor who had fled Wilcox in 1885. She maintained a correspondence with several of these women, offering advice and encouragement. In 1928, Quincy fell ill. It started as a cough that would not go away, then developed into something more serious. The doctors in Fresno diagnosed pneumonia and did what they could, but Quincy was 68 years old, and his body had been worn down by decades of hard labor. Eleanor nursed him devotedly, reading to him, holding his hand, reminiscing about their life together. "I am not afraid," Quincy told her one afternoon as he lay in their bed, the same bed he had built for their first proper house 40 years earlier. "I have lived a good life, Eleanor, better than I ever dreamed possible. I have loved and been loved. I have seen my children grow strong and my grandchildren prosper. I have built something lasting. What more could a man ask for?" "You could ask to stay with me longer," Eleanor said, her voice breaking. "If I could, I would. But if this is my time, I am ready. Promise me something, though." "Anything? Do not mourn too long. You have so much life left in you, so much still to give. Write more books, help more women find their strength. Live fully, Eleanor. Promise me." "I promise," she whispered, though she could not imagine life without him. Quincy died peacefully in his sleep 3 days later, Eleanor beside him, holding his hand. He was buried on a hillside on their property, overlooking the land they had built together, with a simple marker that read, "Quincy Keller, 1860–1928. Beloved husband, father, grandfather." He built a life that mattered. Eleanor mourned deeply, as anyone would after losing a partner of more than 40 years, but she kept her promise to Quincy. She continued to write, publishing a memoir about their life together that became her most popular book. She established a scholarship fund for young women wanting to attend normal school, funded by her book royalties. She remained active in the farming community, offering advice and support to new homesteaders. She lived to see the Great Depression, and watched with pride as her family weathered the economic storm better than most, their diversified farm producing food when food was scarce, their careful saving protecting them from the worst of the financial collapse. She lived to see her great-grandchildren grow into adults, some staying on the land, others pursuing education and careers in cities. The choices they made, she knew, were possible because she and Quincy had chosen to build a foundation of freedom and opportunity all those years ago. In the spring of 1940, Eleanor celebrated her 75th birthday surrounded by 4 generations of family. She was frail now, her hair pure white, her hands twisted with arthritis. But her mind was sharp and her spirit undiminished. "Tell us the story, Grandma," one of her great-grandchildren asked. "Tell us how you and Grandpa met." Eleanor smiled, settling into her chair on the porch that Quincy had built. The farm stretched out around her, transformed over the decades, but still recognizably the land they had claimed in 1885. "I met your grandfather in a general store in Arizona Territory," she began, and as she told the story one more time, she could see it all clearly. Quincy with his worn hat and honest eyes, the desert stretching wild and free, the choice she had made to run toward love instead of away from fear. She told them about the midnight flight from Wilcox, the wedding in Silver City, the first harsh winter in a canvas shelter. She told them about building the house, planting the first crops, the birth of their father William. She told them about hard work and simple joys, about loving someone so completely that nothing else mattered. "Your grandfather used to say we were richer than my father's vault," Eleanor concluded. "And he was right. We built a life filled with love and purpose and meaning. We built something that lasted, something that continues in all of you. That is the richest legacy anyone could hope for. Eleanor died peacefully in her sleep one night in June 1940, 55 years after she had run away with a penniless cowboy. She was buried next to Quincy on the hillside, their markers side by side, looking out over the land they had transformed through love and labor. The farm continued for generations after them, managed by their descendants, a testament to what two people could build when they had courage, determination, and love. Eleanor's books remained in print, inspiring new generations of women to seek their own paths, to value substance over appearance, to measure wealth in love and freedom rather than gold and possessions. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun set over the San Joaquin Valley in shades of gold and rose, people swore they could see two figures on the old porch, silver-haired and hand in hand, watching the day end over the land they had claimed together all those years ago. Whether it was memory or something more, it did not really matter, because the truth was that Eleanor and Quincy were still there in every furrow and fence post, in every fruit tree and foundation stone, in the very soil itself. They had poured their lives into that land, and it had given them back something infinitely more precious. A love that transcended time, a legacy that would never fade, and proof that the richest life is not the one with the most gold, but the one with the most love. Their story became local legend, passed down through generations. The banker's daughter who ran away with a penniless cowboy and built an empire of love. The young woman who had everything and gave it all up for the one thing that truly mattered. The couple who proved that wealth is measured not in what you have, but in what you build together. And in the end, that was the greatest treasure of all. Not the land or the farm or even the family, precious as all those things were, but the simple, profound truth that love, when tended with care and nourished with commitment, could transform two people and create something that would last forever. Eleanor and Quincy had started with nothing but hope and each other, and they had built a life richer than any vault could hold. That was their true legacy, more valuable than gold, more lasting than stone. A love story for the ages, a testament to courage and commitment, a reminder that the best things in life cannot be locked away or counted, only lived and shared and passed on to those who come after. The farm still stands today, parts of it preserved as a historical site, a reminder of the pioneers who settled California and built lives from nothing but determination and dreams. Visitors walk through the original house Quincy built, see Eleanor's books displayed in a small museum, read the letters they wrote to each other during the rare times they were apart. And they leave inspired, carrying with them the message that two people who were brave enough to choose love over security, freedom over comfort, and partnership over propriety, created something that time could not diminish. A legacy of love that would echo through generations, proving that the richest life is the one lived with purpose, passion, and an open heart.